So the first question, again, is going to be, we're oftentimes given the two sides of the spectrum of just treatment when somebody's in pain or has an issue, or there's just movement. And I feel like what we do, and we need to tell a lot more people, is how we're kind of in the middle. But before I lead you into that, why should one do both? Why is that beneficial?
The reality is that we always need to move.
Right.
Not moving is not an option.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes there's instances where we're going to move a little less.
Right.
You know, whether it's acute trauma, injury, you broke an ankle and you got a cast on, it's going to impact how you move.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to adapt to those situations. But we're always trying to get people to move well and move a little bit more.
Right.
Treatment comes along when people don't have the ability to move in certain patterns and they need some help to get there.
Right.
My issue is when you think that you can solve all of the world's problems on a treatment table. From emotional problems to physical problems. The reality is that's just not true.
Yeah.
Okay. On the other end of the spectrum, you don't solve all of the world's problems in the gym with movement either.
Right.
So there has to be this recognition that we need to move, but oftentimes treatment does play a part in moving better.
Right.
So it's a pivotal piece often for people that do have a lot of mobility problems to be able to move better.
Right.
But they have to take that opportunity and then start to move better and move more. And if you don't, you're going to find yourself in a treatment room for a long time. And that's not the goal. Like I said, laying on a table is not how people get better.
Right.
We need to move.
Yeah.
And so we have to move towards that.
That makes sense. I can liken it similar to how we say on the coaching floor, where it's not necessarily the training session that is making you better, it's the recovery from said training session that is getting you better, right? It's not on the therapy table, it's on some of the other stuff that you're doing with that.
Yeah.
Does therapy in general, does that provide the client, the patient, a window of opportunity for getting better? We've just kind of said that, but what does that allow a person to do?
Well, we've talked about hardware and software issues in the past, right? So our pure mobility problems that you're running up into a wall in a certain movement. It's not moving. You as a client can't move it, and me as a practitioner can't move you.
Right.
We need to give that some ability to get into that range. And so treatment, that's where treatment comes in.
Right.
We help free up that. So at the very least, me as a practitioner, I can move that part through range. You still may struggle with it, but we at least give it that opportunity, and then we help you start to use it. And that's the window of opportunity.
Right.
Often if you don't use that window of opportunity and you just take that treatment and you go and you're like, wow, this feels great, and you go about your business,
Right.
those poor movement patterns that you've been doing for a long time stay, and then they create the same restrictions which turn into blockage, and we fall and find ourselves in the same cycle that we've been in.
Right.
Right. So there is a window, and I think the window, how long it is, how short it is, I think it really depends on how long it's been there to begin with.
For sure.
Right. And how long those poor movement patterns have been done and rehearsed. And if you get up off the table and you walk out of the place limping, well, that pelvis we corrected. You walk out of here limping, and by the time you get to the car, the process of moving backwards has already begun.
Yep. Yep. I've experienced that as well. Sort of a more personal story, but it was in university as a student, sitting majority of the day, and then I loved playing squash, and so I would have squash league on Tuesday or Wednesday night, depending on the league. But I would go from sitting all day to playing very aggressive squash, and my low back blew up. And so I was like, okay, well, in the past, I've gotten massage for it, and that gave me, initially, it gave me like a 6-month window where I was pain-free, movement was fine, no issues. That window started to close after subsequent treatments over the course of, I would say, 3 years.
Yeah.
And then when the latest blow up happened, I would get 3 weeks from one chiro treatment. That was sort of it sort of perfectly fit within that window that they recommend anyways, but it was just the person that was recommended to me that I went and saw, and it was a chiro. They would treat me, and it wasn't until, like, this is probably within the last 3 years, that they were like, yeah, you should move, like go to the gym and utilize what I just opened up for you. Mm-hmm. And that was revolutionary to me, even as a kin student, because I was never told to me.
Yeah. And it's funny, as a kin student, you're going, wow, this is new.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, here's the other end of the spectrum is when you just tell somebody, okay, I treated you, I cracked this, I stretched this, go move.
Yeah.
Well, what do people do with that now? They go out and, hey, you know what? I'm gonna go run around the block. Well, running puts a lot of force through your body, and you just went from not being able to move through a certain range to barely being able to control that range.
Yeah.
And now you're doing some high-level activity like running or squash, and all of a sudden your body freaks out and goes, I'm not comfortable with this.
Yeah.
And it reverses things. Right, and we see that a lot. People come and get treatment like, man, I feel great. Stand above the table, and they're back the next week. They're like, man, I'm stiff, really stiff.
Yes.
Oh, why are you stiff? I don't know. I felt great last time I left, and I felt so good. I went for a jog.
Right.
And like after that, I was worse. It happens all the time, right? Because people are like, just go move. It's not just going and moving.
Yeah.
It's recognizing where you have movement issues or movement. Hate the word, dysfunction, movement problems, but it's recognizing those and creating a strategic plan to address them and then implementing it without adding all of these other excessive movement parameters on top of it as you're building. Right? You have to earn the right to get up to those capacity levels.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't earn that right, and that also creates the cycle of treatment.
Yeah, and that is essentially my story, right? Like exactly what you said happened to me for the course of probably 2-3 years. Like it was just on repeat, to the point where I had to like really look deep at myself and be like, okay, I'm not getting down to the root of the problem. Squash isn't helping, so I got to stop. So I did, and I've started to thus like start the path of getting better, which I have been over time. But the thing that you said that struck me was the strategic plan of movement post-treatment. And I'm still saying that ongoing treatment is a part of that plan. And again, it sort of relating to my story, it was very much my own, like it was my chiro and me. There was no other party involved. There wasn't a coach or anything else that was helping me along the process, because I'm a little ego involved, I guess, but like I'm a student, I'm a trainer, I know what I'm doing, but I didn't.
Yes. Well, truthfully, treatment's the easy part. It's pretty easy as a practitioner to go, well, that doesn't move, this doesn't move, and you snap, crack, pop, or stretch this, and that's better. That moves now.
Yeah.
That's the easy part. When you take somebody onto a gym floor or in their environment of play or sport, and you go like, how are they moving in a way that's creating this problem?
Right.
And how do I create a plan to help them unlearn those things and learn something more effective?
Yeah.
That takes time. And on both parts, it takes a keen eye from a practitioner. It takes a commitment from the client, because that's not going to happen in the 30 minutes that I treated somebody, or 45 minutes. You can't make those kinds of changes in 30, 45 minutes, depending on like what the person's background is, how body aware they are, and all of a sudden it's like you just spent an hour just teaching them one thing and they're still struggling with it.
Right.
And so that's the part that we really, as a group of practitioners, and I mean literally a group from personal trainers to kins to physios to athletic therapists, osteos, all of these that fall under either a clinical or a movement coach or anything in between. We really need to recognize this and get better at it.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we're good enough.
Well, and it's hard to be all things in one person, right? Like, how can one become the unicorn of the the world, and then not only that, have the endless hours in a day to be able to do that with every patient or every client? That's a tough gig.
Yeah. Well, now we're talking logistics of how we work, and there's if we can paint a picture of what ideal is. Mm-hmm. And then we have to figure out what our current situation is and work around it. I mean, there's many practitioners that see people every 15 minutes, or they have 4 people at a time in 15 minutes. And I'm just going to straight up say that it's ridiculous, and that model needs to end and die. It's a business model. It's not a healthcare model.
Yes.
And unfortunately, there's sacrifice from a financial perspective to do things well. Mm-hmm. And if you want to do things well, then you have to weigh those things out. If you don't, then go ahead, continue to do those models. But I think eventually the consumer will drive things, and they'll recognize that they're not getting better in that model anymore.
Yeah, or it takes 3 years.
Yeah.
Which, again, that irks me on the the kin coach person on the floor.
Yeah.
But when you're working with somebody that's had an ongoing neck issue, or they have a hard time looking over their shoulder, and you have no answer, or you're just like, yeah, you need somebody to dig in there with your hands, or with their hands, and you need treatment to help that. We can influence it on the floor, but I'm sorry.
Well, it gets really tough when that person says, yeah, I've done physio, or I've seen a therapist, I've seen somebody for the last 2 years, and I don't understand. They told me to come here. And so it gets really confusing. And so that's why I said, at the end of the day, if we're in this profession, whether it be on the clinical side or on the movement side or anything in between, mm-hmm. our job is to be good at what we do.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's enough checks and balances in how each of us work as practitioners from objective criteria for what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And often it becomes, how do you feel? How's your pain today?
Yeah.
I think it's better. Okay. That's awesome. And then we go in, we rub the same thing we rubbed last week on them, and then they leave.
Yeah.
And they come in the next week, they're like, yeah, I think it's a little bit better because time elapsed.
Right.
And pain got better.
Yeah.
We know that. With time, most pain gets better. It doesn't mean we did anything.
Yeah.
And so we have to be better at how we objectify what we're doing treatment-wise and movement-wise. And like I said, that cost time and money. And if you're not willing to look at those things, then I think this profession may not be for you.
It's very true. Very true. So how does one, what was the question there? How does one get to that point or become more, is it an awareness thing? Is it a self sort of check with what's, it's sort of I guess you're kind of asking accountability to yourself in some aspect, not only from the patient side, but the practitioner side as well. But as a person receiving treatment and is sort of caught in that loop of I'm seeing physio every month and I don't notice much different, or it doesn't have to be physio, don't get me wrong, but they're just in that loop and they're like, how do I get out of it to make myself better?
Yeah. So what do you say to the client, the person that's potentially stuck in the cycle?
Yeah.
You have to have some movement objective. What we talked about earlier, everything has to move towards movement.
Right.
If we're not progressing towards that, and all we're sort of creating as our objective is our pain scale, 1 through 10,
Yeah.
which we ask everybody. Pain 1, 10 is the worst pain you've ever felt in your life, and 1 is nothing.
Mhm.
What do you feel? And if you look down, you're like, oh, I started at 10 and now I'm at 6, and that's your only criteria for how you're doing.
Right.
You need to get out and find somebody that's creating a movement criteria.
Mhm.
And that movement criteria should start with fundamental human movement and progress towards what your goals are as an individual. Are you a hockey player? Are you a stay-at-home mom? What are your goals from a movement perspective? And then your objectives have to look like what your goals are.
Right.
And so that's the best advice I can offer to people stuck in the loop. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in that loop forever. You're going to be looking at that pain criteria going, okay, well, I got to 5. And
Yeah.
eventually it's just like, okay, well, I don't have 3 days a week to go anymore and get treatment.
Oh, good Lord. 3 days of treatment.
So good question. 3 days a week of treatment, which is very common in some practices. Like, hey,
Yeah.
you're going to come in, I'm going to see you 3 days a week. I think good on movement, sometimes that can be really beneficial when we're start to, the quality and the quantity of movement needs to be there.
Mhm.
If we're purely treating, it's 3 days of treatment a week. Because when we treat, it's like hitting reset on your computer.
Right.
We're wiping the software off. Depending on what you're treating. Like if you're, when I say treating, like I'm talking how I would treat, but
Right.
it's not hooking machines up to people. That's
Right.
not resetting anything. That's tingly things going through your body. When you hit reset, you can't do that 3 times a week.
Or
It's a lot.
the amount of the load on your nervous system that's taking.
It's a lot. It's a lot because that window of opportunity we talked about, well, now you're constantly wiping everything off the map and starting fresh.
Never thought of it that way.
When you go and start to do movement, there's going to be some good, some bad, right? And then as we progress, it gets more and more good. But if we treat with high frequency, we don't ever give the body a chance just to learn.
Right.
And take the good and the bad and figure out what is good and what is bad.
Right.
So I'm always very wary of over-treating. We got to be careful of that. Recognizing what are the priorities that we're trying, what are our objectives, what are our goals.
Yeah.
And on this given day.
Yeah.
And how do we help them achieve that? And that may mean leaving some things from a treatment perspective to down the road.
Right.
And dealing with things that are more important today, right? So, I don't know how we got on that tangent, but that was a good one.
Well, and sort of to double down on the realization that I just had, when you do treatment and you are provided that window of opportunity, I've always heard of it in, I guess, a little bit longer term, or like at least a week to 2 weeks is typically how I perceived it. But when you're treating in 3 times within a 7-day period, you're wiping the work that you have done, whereas previously it was just a preconceived notion that I was just like, no, that's still there and good movement on it, but I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, and like I said, depends what you treat, but I mean,
sure.
You can definitely create more problems. Like when we treat, let's case in point, I had a client, old ankle injuries, never really addressed properly, and we watched them at the start just do a simple single leg balance.
Yeah.
Can you balance on one leg? Doesn't look bad, a little quiver in the foot, but they're able to balance.
Yeah.
I go assess it, and his talus is in it, we can get into treatment stuff, but it's not moving well.
Yeah.
Okay? Treat it. That hardware problem, that pure hardware problem, is gone now. I'm like, man, this is like butter. This ankle feels way better now.
Yeah.
Stands up. He can't stand on one leg.
Interesting.
He's adapted to a problem in that ankle
Right.
over many years. And his first realization of in gravity from the table is like, I don't know what to do with this. It's like, this is crazy. Like, I can't balance on this. So the client's going, man, I got worse. And I'm going, no. You got better.
Yeah.
But we have to take this opportunity now.
Right.
And that simple single leg stance in the room was too hard. So we have to find a level for him that is easier.
Right.
Or give him some help in that posture. Something that creates a challenge that he's able to learn without failing.
Right.
Right? The single leg stance, he failed. He stood up, bam, failed. And if we do it enough, he's going to create compensation. So we have to find challenge but not failure.
Right.
So if we had him come in every day or 3 times a week and say that big blockage, it's going to take a while for that to come back. But all of the restrictions, so the lesser of the evils, so to speak, not the blocks, but the tightness.
Yeah.
We treated that 3 more times that week.
Yeah.
He's going to do the same thing every time he does it. Boom, reset. I'd rather him go for 2 weeks, work on some things after we've created a plan, and then reevaluate and see where he's at. Let his body sort of deal with where he's at, and then we'll see more in 2 weeks. We just you can't get through layers of problems, treating 3 times a week like that.
We have hit on layering fundamental movement on top of treatment, or on treatment. What does that look like? Like an example of what those are in your mind? Because to me they're very different. Well, not very different, but coming from a training perspective, fundamental movements are squat, hinge, push, pull, and being able to carry something. But that was sort of the...
So I agree with all of that. And I think fundamental to that is, can you flex? Can you extend? Can you rotate? Do you have range through the arms? Do you have flexion, rotation, extension? So to me, those are fundamentals to those bigger movements.
Gotcha.
But then I would say what you just said, those are fundamentals. Those are very important, the ability to squat, hinge. But you're not squatting if your hips don't flex. Right? You're not hinging if those hips don't flex. If you can't maintain the thorax and extension, you're not squatting. So the fundamentals of those movements are what we need to make sure exist. And if they don't, we have to figure out why, and then build patterns in on the movement side to build up to the things that you just talked about. And sometimes it is going directly to what you just talked about. For sure, Like, hey, we get that hip flexion back and we want to look at that hinge. We want to see how the hip stabilizes and controls. Perfect. I do that all the time. Sometimes doesn't work out that way. Sometimes we have to go to much lower threshold kind of movements. Or it is, a deadlift, but it's a deadlift pattern. We're not under load, or we're using assistance. So there's different ways to achieve what we need. It's just recognizing, like I said earlier, the challenge versus the failure. And you want to be in the challenge zone. You don't want to be in the failure. You also don't want to be in the zone where it's so easy they're not learning. If you're just doing the same exercise and it's like, man, this is easy, you're not progressing there either. I think a progression model, we always want to look towards getting people in posture, meaning in gravity on their feet. That's the goal. We live life on our feet. We don't live it on all fours. So we may use exercises on all fours at different points in our, continuum. But that's not where it ends. I've had clients come in and give me a sheet of paper. They said, hey, this is what I got from my therapist. I've been doing this for 3 years. And I look at it. Every single exercise is on the ground. They're like, oh, I'm working my glute med. Because that never transitions to their life. We have to move towards exercises on their feet. And how we get there, I don't care. You may use underlying postures that are lower. That's how, as human beings, we came up onto our feet.
Yeah.
Started out on the ground, so fair enough. But we didn't stay there.
Yeah.
At least not by choice.
Yeah.
So yeah, our goal is to get to our feet.
Yeah.
And then we ask, well, what kind of capacity and loads? What are the things that you do?
Right.
Because running and walking, maybe that's all you want to do, but there's all sorts of other things that we do in life, and so we have to address those.
Yeah. Previously, and again, earlier in my training career, those 5 or 6 movements were given to me as the fundamentals. That's what I subscribe to. The more and more that I get into the kinesiology side, and the longer that I progress in the field, sort of just how you outlined, there is that subset of stuff which you can put a theoretical line that above it is training / personal training, strength coach, whatever. Underneath it is more rehab / practitioner treatment focused stuff. However, it doesn't take away the importance of it. Like, it's just different layers of the onion, if you will.
Yeah.
And then sort of where I'm going with this is we've alluded to, even though my experience has grown over the course of the year, I can't solve everything because of, limited experience. I don't have a manual therapist designation. I can't manipulate a joint because I have no training in it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just trying to reinforce the fact that you need that.
Well, you need a team, right?
Yeah.
And not one person ever has the solution.
Right.
I think it's the recognition that what you're doing is or isn't working to meet the objective criteria of what we've set out.
Right.
And like I said earlier, I think a lot of people don't even have the objective criteria what they're trying to do.
Right.
And so it's hard to be self-analytical or self-critical of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I think the start point is make sure you have some sort of litmus test of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So you know if what you're implementing is working. Right? And if it's not, then you either change what you're doing, or you say, okay, who in my network do I know that perhaps has some other tools that they can explore to meet this objective criteria?
Right.
And so having a team of people is important. At the same time, it's improving recognizing where your tools are today, and going, do I want to add more tools to my toolbox?
Right.
Right? And if the answer is no, I'm okay with that. That's cool. That's fine. Just make sure you have people that you know that have those appropriate tools.
Right.
But don't keep that person in that you're working with and be like, hey, you know what? I can solve all your problems. And clearly you're not. Or you just say, you know what? That objective criteria, that doesn't matter anymore.
Right.
I've experienced that. And, you can't touch your toe? Don't worry about that. That doesn't matter. It's not relevant to what you do. Okay. So, point being, have an objective criteria you're trying to meet.
Yeah.
And stick to it.
Talk to me about the emotional side of it, right? Because I see it on the floor, and that was a big hurdle that I had to run into as a personal trainer before I even got here, was we're using personal training or fitness or movement as a scapegoat for what's actually going on deeper. And this is like wide ranging, but you see it on the table, you see it outside of the table.
Well, 100%. Anybody that's coming in with some reason for being in my office or in front of you, they have a history. And oftentimes we focus on the physical side of their history. What did you break? What surgeries did you have?
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily touch on some of the background emotionally.
Yeah.
And it plays a role. I think the question becomes how much of a role in that particular case. Mm-hmm. And is it the root of their problem?
Gotcha.
And that is what we as practitioners need to be very aware of on the front end, and how are we separating those two? Because the reality is they are interlinked, right? You have a bad day, your physical ailments are going to feel worse, right? You come out, you had a stressful day at work, the kids are on you, and your wife's irritating you. Man, that sore knee that I heard a month ago, it's really acting up.
Mm-hmm.
You as an individual don't make the connection between all those other things. You're just like, my knee hurts.
Right.
And you show up at your therapist, you show up in my office, hey, my knee hurts. And I'm going, okay, your knee hurts. And I do a physical assessment. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with your knee.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll take some Advil.
Right. Easy. Here you go.
See you later, right?
Yeah.
And it happens all the time. So the question becomes, like I said earlier, where's the root? Because sometimes that knee was hurt in
Right.
a actual trauma. You tore your MCL 10 years ago, and sometimes it hurts, sometimes it doesn't. But man, it's been way worse lately, and it's some of these other stresses that are going on that are bringing out this issue. The root isn't necessarily the emotional side.
Right.
Right? The root is still the physical, but it's being made worse by the emotional. That can go the other way, where same knee pain, but the driver is the emotional side. And people come in, they think it's a physical problem, but they've seen every practitioner on the block.
Right.
And then some. And now they come into your office, and you're like, hey, I got this. Everybody else doesn't know what they're doing.
I can solve all your problems.
Solve all your problems. And that person sits there and tells you everything. And sometimes they're hard pickups, but the more you are in it's experience, it's getting to, sometimes it's not day one.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a spidey sense with people.
Sure.
Like it's experience. I'd love to tell you there's an objective criteria for finding out if this is an emotional problem. But when you do a good history, there'll be warning flags.
Right.
Right? Oh, there's antidepressant medication. Oh, there's recent divorces, recent deaths in the family.
Mm-hmm.
There's all sorts of like clues. It doesn't mean that problem is definitely rooted in emotion, but it's like, okay, as I go through this and I start to assess them physically, if things aren't lining up, if things aren't making sense with what I'm finding physically, okay, I'm going to put that in the back of my mind. I'm not going to sit there and tell a person they're a nutcase on, ever.
Right.
But you're going to start opening up some dialogue and see, how much that person responds. And when you do it well, people do respond, and you'll find like, oh, you know what? I didn't tell you this, but my brother died last month, and I took it bad. It's like, huh, interesting.
Right.
Yeah. Did that back pain start around the same time? Oh yeah, funny you mentioned that. It did.
Right.
And so you lead them a little bit, and you help them come to the conclusion that this isn't necessarily just a physical problem. And then you bring up, are you seeing somebody, or there some people in that realm that on that team that we talked about. There are people that I can refer to in that area that can help them. And sometimes therapy is part of that process, but addressing that root is important, right? I had a client today, and I mean, like, we'll just say client. Yeah. Sent to me by a good, referral trainer, Ken, who was like, look, I saw this lady, her ankles don't move. I think she was 68 years old, fairly active, still working. Anyway, she came in and she's like, my ankles don't move. That's what I was told. That's why I'm here. I'm like, okay. We go through a history. There's a history a mile long on the emotional side of things. She admitted it. She knew very well, said she's dealt with it, counseling, blah, blah, blah. But also physical trauma, like knees. I think when she was like earlier in life, surgeries on both knees for things that she wasn't even sure. And it looked like a shark had taken a bite out of both of her legs. And I think she called it she had to see a doctor later in years to tell her what he thought the surgery was. It was a tibial tuberosity osteectomy, I think is what she told me.
So, like,
yeah,
where they took a bit off?
That's all I can take from that is that they removed a portion of the tibial tuberosity.
Okay.
But the scar, not a word of a lie, was from here all the way down, wrapped around here on both sides. So she had like matching, it was like a shark, just went both sides. And so she's hypermobile. You know, she said like as a kid, like knees, always had knee problems. You know, so it wasn't very good in phys ed. Actually, we had a really good conversation around that, which reminded me after. So a lot of problems around her knees, and so I guess like, oh, you know, let's do surgery, and we'll solve your problems. Well, it didn't solve her problems. Then later in life, she thought, well, orthotics. Somebody suggested orthotics, and so she got orthotics, and miraculously that helped her. It helped her knee pain. Okay. Now she can't go without orthotics or shoes. And I mean, like when she's wearing shoes, she's got like
bricks,
6 inches of foam plus her orthotics, and that's what she can go around without getting, you know, pain into her shins, knees.
Right.
And you know, I said to her like, can we get you, what do you think about not wearing orthotics? Like, what does that do to your thought process? She's like, well, whenever I do it, I'm like, within an hour I got pain. Like,
wow.
A lot of pain.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, interesting. So, long story short, I mean, the ankles had restriction, no major blockages. The knees were massive problems. You know, from scar tissue to other traumas. We treated her on the knees and helped her a ton in the ankle flexion.
Right.
But more importantly, we got her out and we got her walking in her stocking feet with walking poles, hiking poles.
Yep.
And said, look, you know what? We're going to start this by trying to take the orthotic out of your shoe. You'll still wear the big 6-inch foam shoe.
Stack, yeah.
Yeah. We're going to see how that goes for a day. And 15 minutes a day, you're going to walk with hiking poles in your apartment, stocking feet, and get the foot to start feeling the ground.
Yeah.
Because that foot was atrophied to death. So her balance was shot.
Yeah.
So all of this, in my opinion, started with a knee surgery that I'm not sure was really warranted.
It's questionable.
I'm not sure like what was done or what was accomplished.
Yeah.
Which then turned into balance issues because the orthotic was falsely supporting her to take away pain in her knee.
Right.
And now she's got balance issues and knee pain and reoccurring falls.
That's not good.
So our strategy is, let's try to address the knees. Now, there will be a limit to how much we can address this.
Sure.
But we got to start getting her feet to do what they need to do without an orthotic, and that's not going to happen overnight. And it's going to take treatment and movement, and it's going to happen together.
Yeah.
As we regain, we move more, and we move well, and that's why the walking poles, because she wasn't moving well without the walking poles.
Gotcha. You're just providing that assistance to ensure.
Yeah, it trained her gait in a good pattern, a cross-chain pattern.
Right.
And it gave her enough assistance that it was challenging, but she was learning.
Right.
So for her, that's kind of where we're starting. Guess what? You're going to walk, and your foot is going to feel the ground because those muscles in the feet haven't felt that in years.
That's crazy. Like, this is going to send us on a wild tangent, but like I used to sell shoes. Like I was at SportCheck for SportCheck and other retailers that primarily footwear was my section.
Yeah.
For probably 10 years, over the course of 10 years, I should say.
Yeah.
And I've gone from like general footwear to like stylish SportCheck sort of stuff, to a specialty triathlon shop where running shoes was a part of the one-stop shop, if you will, to more hiking related. And I've seen the like going from the classic like huge stack to the Vibram 5-finger, minimalist to upon minimalist, to now the recurrence of the brand like Hoka, for example, Hoka 1-1 or whatever, which is maximal cushioning.
Yeah.
Which, if you're running long distance, sweet, has a place, but like people that wrecked their feet because they went from a fat stack to a barefoot shoe because somebody said that was the way that they were supposed to run, with like zero training, zero tapering, or like zero progression, like mind blowing. And then they're like, no, now I have to wear orthotics, and you're just like, oh my word.
You touched on two very good hot topics: barefoot training and orthotics. I think exactly what you said there about like going from like the big 6-inchers to like, oh man, I'm gonna run barefoot because that's the big thing. Oh man, like one, we have concrete, okay, and run down the sidewalk on concrete and see how that does for you. You're not running in dirt and sand and grass. So there's a place for making sure you have proper footwear for your
what
foot.
You're doing.
Yeah, for what you're doing and for your foot.
Yeah.
Because there is a point where you get to in life, if you've worn a shoe your entire life or an orthotic or something, there is a point where like that is adapted to that situation, and you can make changes.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But it may never be enough change to warrant the amount of force and impact that it would take from barefoot running. It's an individual case-by-case situation.
For sure.
If it's the person's objective and criteria that says, hey, I want to barefoot run. This is my goal. Okay, my job is to help you meet your goal. And we're going to create a plan, and you, as a client, have to meet those criteria. And if we don't, we have to ask, why? Is there another way to get here?
Yeah.
Or you can't. We've done everything we can, and you can't get to these criteria. Do you still want to run? Because there's going to be a risk reward here, right? You're going to go, you're going to do some stuff, and we're going to have to undo it, right? So, so the barefoot aspect, I think, truthfully, the more minimalist our shoes are, the better, especially earlier in life. If we can let our feet feel the ground, we don't get all tied up in really supportive shoes.
Yeah.
I think as you're going through those growth stages of life, those periods are really important. The challenge is often that's the years where it's like, preschool, you got to be in your indoor shoes.
Right.
You got to, right? And, kids often get stuck into these shoes. There's also a big market, right? Like kids' shoes, like, hey, mom and dad don't want to do wrong to their kid, and they're out there, spending the big dollars on like, these are the right supports for my kid's foot. And I think we underestimate how well a child's foot will adapt and build strength to the situation if we just allow it to.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, you look at people that have lost their hands, but they have use of their feet, what they're able to do with them.
Right.
I've seen certain cases where people are like picking up and writing with their toes.
Yeah.
Imagine taking your hand and putting it in a mitt from the day you were born till now. Do you think your ability to use those fingers is going to be very good? No. You're going to end up like this. Think about what with your foot. It's the same thing. How well do you have movement of those toes individually? No. Not great. And I agree. I'm like that as well. It's hard, because we wear shoes and that's what happens. So I think to second, the other thing you talked about there was the orthotic, and this is a bit of a pet peeve of mine because in the industry, it's a really easy way to make money.
So easy.
Plain and simple. It's covered by many insurance companies. It's $500. You stand on this mold. Boom.
Here you go.
There you go. Way too many people have orthotics. We spend more time getting people out of orthotics than putting them in. It's a tool.
Yep.
It has its place. But I can tell you, in the time that I've done this, I've recommended orthotics to one person. Ask me how many people I've gotten out of orthotics.
Oh. Are we into the triple digits now?
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And some of those people skeptical at the start.
Oh, for sure, because they've been sold and fed that. Yeah.
I overpronate, I underpronate, I supinate, I need these. How do we make that decision? How do we decide if this orthotic is appropriate? Well, number one, if you've got a pure mobility problem in the ankle,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be an orthotic, at least at that point. We need to sort out that mobility problem first.
Yeah.
A lot of times nobody looks. They just,
No.
they look at your pronating to your supinating,
Yep.
and they go, okay, we need to correct that. Maybe if you just assessed the ankle and treated some of the mobility problems, that
Right.
problem you're recognizing goes
Yeah.
away. But you're going to now add in a support to change that, right? It's a problem. The other thing is, sometimes the things they recognize at the feet, again, the supination, the pronation, are problems caused by somewhere else in the body.
Right.
A mobility problem somewhere else.
Yes.
The knee, the hip, the spine, even the cranium can cause tension down to the foot and alters foot mechanics.
Right.
And now you're seeing somebody who's got hyper focused on the foot and they're sticking an orthotic in there.
Yeah.
And you're taking away the compensation from another mobility problem in the body. So now what happens? Now the body's got to figure out another way. It's like, oh man, why does my hip hurt? And so they end up in my office. My hip hurts.
Yeah.
I don't know why. And I go, oh. So we talk about orthotics. When did you have orthotics?
Right.
Oh, I got orthotics, a year ago. And so you start asking, yeah.
Start peeling the onion.
Yeah. So how do we decide? Getting back to,
Sure.
how do we decide if this person actually needs them? So one, we make sure there aren't mobility problems locally.
Right.
But on a more kind of global test, I'll look at people's movement, fundamental movement, with their orthotics in and with their orthotics out.
Yeah.
And we see what are the orthotics doing to all of their movements, their toe touch, their backward bend, their rotation. If the orthotics make one movement worse, I start making a plan to get them out of them.
Right.
They either have to do nothing to their movement, so nothing changes between them in and out,
Yeah.
or they help all of their movements.
Gotcha.
For me to say, okay, let's, at least for now, we're not going to touch this.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are some of the ways I make those decisions. It's not only, I mean, locally, like I said, if there's a mobility problem in that ankle, right away I'm like, we have to address this.
Yeah.
The other challenge is, whenever we treat, we're going to change things, and that cast doesn't change. That orthotic doesn't change.
Right.
It's the same way today as it was 3 years ago when you had those made. And so if I treat your ankle, your foot, your knee, your pelvis, and we alter some of those problems, well, now you got a cast in your shoe
Yeah.
of your old you.
Right.
And so you get up off this table, get back in your shoe with that orthotic and walk out of here, and every step you make is bringing back some of those problems. So if I don't know you're wearing orthotics and you keep coming back to my office, like, man, like I felt great for a little bit, but man, a week later I'm back to the same place.
Yeah.
It's another potential reason that we have to explore. So
Right.
yeah, orthotics. Sorry, I'm gonna offend some people out there on that one.
Well, and again, because I've been on both sides of the spectrum now, where I was selling those shoes because that's how I was educated as a essentially minimum wage sales associate. It's a cheap and easy fix that helps people in the moment. I will say that.
Yeah.
But long term isn't ideal. not even the orthotics bit, but like the motion control shoes of like supporting preventing the pronation and whatnot. I got out of that fairly early compared to some of my coworkers because of my education and my interest in the field. But also it was just like, yeah, I mean, like watching you walk, like you don't need it. You standing there and you walking is entirely different. And then you running, yeah, again, it's entirely different.
Yeah, I mean, there's machines now you can stand on, and they'll scan your foot and basically, here's your orthotic.
Yeah.
Oh man, like, not cool. That is some of the worst sort of healthcare. There's a place for orthotics.
Yep.
People that do them. You want to work with that team we talked about. You want to work with people that know, like, do that well.
Yeah.
And they're at the top of their game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just, hey, like, here's a machine. Go stand over here on this machine. We'll figure out what's wrong with you. Yeah.
It's just like, not that we have one, but like, yeah, go sit on the leg press machine and be there for 15 years. You'll get strong.
Just, yeah. As a coach, I'll stand there and count those reps for you.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, it's been interesting on that, like coming out of that to even to the point where like later in my footwear sales career, I would flat out tell people like, you don't need that, you need to get out of that. Like,
yeah.
Yes, I have training in this other world called kinesiology, health and fitness, but like here as a salesperson telling you to not buy something is kind of against the job description. And so people would give me like this weird, like, you're supposed to put me in shoes, not take them away from me. Like, what the heck?
Yeah.
But like, again, it's just like, I help them further, like longer term, and
our job
so on
in this industry is to help the person that comes into our office, into our gym, into our space. And sometimes that means telling the truth to what you're sitting here, you're going, you know what? I don't think you need those shoes.
Yeah.
I don't think you need those orthotics. And sometimes that rubs people the wrong way.
Yeah.
And that's fine. At the end of the day, you have to be accountable to the client in front of you, and your objective is to help them get better. And so if that makes somebody mad that sold those orthotics to them, well, so be it.
One last thing I want to ask you, referring to the team scenario.
Yeah.
Ideally, in like a next to perfect world, what does an everyday person, who's on their team? No holes barred, like finances notwithstanding.
Yeah. Whew. Good question. I think that you need to have somebody that oversees the people on that team. Okay, first and foremost. Somebody that can be your direct liaison.
Okay.
Somebody has an overview knowledge, doesn't have to be a specialty in every one area, but has an overview knowledge of them and an overview knowledge of the people in that team. That's the direct contact. Right? I think that's step one, because otherwise it's, I went and saw my nutrition guy and I went and saw my coach, and like there's all these different messages, and that becomes burdensome.
Right.
I think at the end of the day there should be one person kind of creating the plan with you, and then they bring in the people they feel they need for your objectives and for your goals.
Gotcha.
Right? So, I mean, yeah, we could sit here and say, well, we need a sleep specialist, we need a nutrition person, we need a manual therapist, we need a strength coach, a psychologist, a naturopath, like sleep specialist. What like, who am I missing here? We could just lambaste every professional and say, here's your team.
Yeah.
I think the reality is we need to know, well, what are your objectives, what are your goals?
Right.
What are we trying to achieve here? And then we will facilitate the people that we need to help you meet those objectives and goals.
Interesting. I was fully expecting you to be like, okay, most bang for your buck, like sleep, psychology, nutrition, and movement, and then maybe therapy. That's like where my immediate brain went, but like that makes more sense, right? Because then you can
ask
pull.
me that question 5 years ago,
Right.
and I may have said that. Everybody changes and evolves, right? And I
Yes.
think like the more and more I, work in this field, the more I see everybody's an individual, and there isn't a cookie cutter solution for everybody. And I think the importance of having an individual that understands that and can step back and go, okay, this is the weakest link. We need to address this, and I don't have the tools for that, so I'm going to bring somebody into the team to help us on that. That's important.
Yeah.
And the reality is that's usually the first, or it should be, the first person that client goes and sees.
Yeah.
In this industry, should be the doctor, right?
Should be.
Unfortunately, like it's challenging because doctors don't have, like I have a couple doctors that come and see me, and I know the challenges they face from time perspective.
Right.
Right? They're doing the best they can with the time they're given.
Yeah.
And I think in a system that is funded by the government, that you're getting a minimum standard. It's not optimal. It's the minimum standard.
Sure.
And if you value your health and understand that it's important, you're going to invest in it. And so your minimal standard is covered, but then you have to go out and go, okay, what's the investment I need to make to address preventatively some of these other things?
Right.
And so that's where you source out, there's naturopath, there's Chinese medicine, there's people like me, people go and source out and pay for these things. And so to me, that first person that people see should be that person that recognizes or does the due diligence to figure out what really is the problem. Because the person may not know. They come in with all of these, maybe one or two main issues.
Yeah.
Our job is to figure out what they are and then go, am I the right person to help this person?
Yeah. Yeah.